Even the 7-year peace treaty spoken by Daniel can be found in Islam. Is it coincidence? Hardly. After rising to power, and as a prelude to his invasion of Israel, the Antichrist is said to confirm a peace treaty with the nation of Israel for 7 years. Quote, he will confirm a covenant with many for 7 years, end of quote, in Daniel 9:27. In context, this verse shows us that the Antichrist will confirm and not establish a peace treaty. As is commonly thought, people used to think that the Antichrist establishes a peace treaty. That's not what the text says. He could confirm a peace treaty such as Oslo or Saudi Plan and review them. This is a pre-existing agreement that will be re-established with Israel for 7 years. However, the Bible also reveals that after only 3.5 years, the Antichrist will break this 7-year covenant. As we can see, Satan, through the Islamic prophecies, has set up Muslims of the world to receive the Antichrist as their Messiah, Mahdi. Islam's prophet Muhammad talked about this 7-year peace treaty of the Mahdi. He had stated that it will be a treaty that is done between a Jew from the tribe of Aaron, who is Moses' brother, and will be upheld for 7 years. Another hadith also speaks of the reign of the Mahdi in this way. Quote, he will divide the property and will govern the people by the sunnah, that is Islamic hadith, of their prophet and establish Islam on earth. He will remain 7 years, then die. The Muslims will pray over him. So the Mahdi will fill the earth with equity and justice as it was filled with oppression and tyranny, and he will rule for 7 years. And that's the end of the quote. The Bible warns us regarding the Antichrist, that by peace he will destroy many. Does that ring a bell? Who are saying that Islam is a peaceful religion? Had Western believers diligently read the scriptures, we would not be in such a mess. The East needs your help. We have millions of Muslims converting to Christianity. Many are awakening to the evil that Islam truly is. These converts can offer you much knowledge, yet they need your help. Christians suffer by the millions. My village in Bethlehem, it is now virtually void of Christians. Lands have been confiscated, including my own. Sacred locations, including the Messiah's birthplace, have been desecrated. Egyptian Coptic Christians are daily persecuted. Their women raped, kidnapped. Peace demonstrators petitioning Israel always carry leaflets that say things like, stop the cycle of violence. Yet violence in the Middle East almost inevitably comes as a result of false treaties which are never kept. Instead, they are almost always a stepping stone to further escalate violence in what Muslims call hudna. Hudna is a term all Westerners must learn. After 9/11, Westerners learned the word jihad. Well, not exactly. They are still divided on whether the term means holy war against all things non-Islamic or an internal struggle with self-betterment. Even the Islamophilic scholar Reuven Firestone has acknowledged that dubious nature of the oral tradition upon which this alleged interpretation of jihad rests, this inner struggle. Its source, he says, is not usually given, and it is in fact nowhere to be found in the canonical collections of the hadith. Although the word jihad standing by itself means struggle, what Westerners need to focus on when reading the hadith regarding Muhammad's jihad is similar to the focus needed when reading Mein Kampf or My Struggle by Adolf Hitler. Ask yourself, struggle with what? In time, those who are leaning towards believing that jihad simply means struggle within will understand. It will just take more lessons until they will see. But the word hudna needs to be understood as well. In the Muslim mind, hudna is an Arabic term for a truce meant to produce a period of calm with the enemy in order to gain concessions, regroup, rearm and re-attack at the appropriate time. This has been its purpose throughout Muslim history. Based on Islam's understanding of Muhammad's use of it, a hudna could last as long as 10 years. Take, for example, the Oslo Peace Accords. Arafat relied on the term when he spoke about his commitment in 1994 to the Oslo Peace Accords. At the mosque in Johannesburg, just a month after the signing, Arafat declared, not realizing that he was being taped, that the accords were merely a way to facilitate his jihad against Israel. Later, when challenged about this, he wiggled out of it by declaring that he was using the term jihad in its most positive sense, a struggle against inner negative forces. So Arafat presented himself as a jihad fighter for peace. Even Faisal Husseini, one of the PLO's highest level spokespersons, clarified the meaning of the Oslo Accord to the world in an interview with an Egyptian newspaper. I quote, he said, "Had the US and Israel realized before Oslo that all that was left of the Palestinian national movement and the pan-Arab movement was a wooden Trojan horse called Arafat, they would never have opened their fortified gates and left it inside their walls. The Oslo Agreement or any other agreement is just a temporary procedure, just a step towards something bigger." Faisal continues, "Our ultimate goal is the liberation of all historic Palestine from Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. That means the annihilation of Israel." The story of the Trojan horse is synonymous to Islam's hudna. Hamas agreed to several ceasefires between 1993 and 2003, none of these agreements were honored. The West must understand these offers as mere tactical maneuvers to allow militant groups time to live to fight another day. Even though it seems that Hamas might reject any peace plan, rest assured that in the near future they will. Yet again, it will be a signed hudna, not a peace treaty. But now you, my Western friend, know the difference. It will be yet another Trojan horse. I have stated this on record. So when it happens, you will remember. What the West does not understand about Islamism is that jihad is very systematic. It has stages. If Muslims have the upper hand, then jihad is waged by force. If Muslims do not have the upper hand, in this case in the West, then jihad is waged through financial and political means. Since Muslims do not have the upper hand in America or Europe, they talk about peace in front of you while supporting Hamas and Hezbollah in the back room. The whole idea of Islam being a peaceful religion emanates from the silent stage of jihad. Muslim scholar Sheikh Qaradawi, probably one of the most prominent Sunni Muslim scholars today, taught Muslims this form of trickery at conferences all over the US and in Europe. I have it on video. At one conference, Qaradawi used the example of Salahuddin, what you call Saladin. Saladin was asked to concede to peace with the verse from the Quran in chapter 8, verse 61. Quote, "And if they incline to peace, then incline to it and trust in Allah." However, from Quran 47:35, he replied, "And be not slack so as to cry for peace, and you have the upper hand." In Islam, conceding to peace means that the Islamic ummah or nation is weak. But as soon as Islam becomes the stronger force, it switches into war mode and high gear. So to understand this whole concept, we must also go back to the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. To understand it, I need to explain an essential bit of Islamic history known as this Treaty of Hudaybiyah. During the early years of Muhammad's small but growing movement, the Muslims were in conflict with the tribe of Quraysh, who were the guardians of the so-called holy city of Mecca. Muhammad and the Muslims had been kicked out of Mecca and were now living roughly 200 miles to the north in Medina. During those days, the various surrounding Arab tribes would make a yearly religious pilgrimage to the pagan shrine in Mecca known as the Kaaba. But because the Quraysh and the Muslims were enemies, and because the Quraysh were much more powerful than the Muslims, they would not allow them to make any pilgrimage. Then one night, Muhammad claimed to have received a revelation whereby he said that Allah told him that he and the Muslims would make the pilgrimage to Mecca. But as the Muslims were attempting to sneak into the city at a place called the Spring of Hudaybiyah, they were intercepted by Quraysh troops. It was there that the men of Quraysh disrespected and shamed Muhammad in front of his men. They also refused the Muslims entry into Mecca. However, they did offer the Muslims a very generous deal. This deal became known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Both parties agreed not to attack each other for 10 years. Because the Muslims were by far the weaker and smaller group, the peace agreement was clearly a generous deal on the Quraysh part. But Muhammad was humiliated and his Muslims were covered with shame. They were terribly embarrassed that their so-called prophet had been treated so poorly and did nothing to respond other than roll over and agree to the treaty. They were also completely disillusioned because Muhammad had obviously prophesied falsely regarding the pilgrimage. But Muhammad's response to his followers was typical of a false prophet. He simply painted a new bullseye around his arrow. Muhammad argued that Allah had never said that the Muslims would make pilgrimage this year, but that they would simply make it someday. Al-Bukhari, in fact, records this hilarious event when Umar said, "I went to the Prophet and said, 'Aren't you truly the apostle of Allah?' The Prophet said back to him, 'Yes, indeed.' I said, 'Isn't our cause just and the cause of the enemy unjust?' He said, 'Well, yes.' I said, 'Then why should we be humble in our religion?' He said, 'I am Allah's apostle and I do not disobey him, and he will make me victorious.' I said, 'Didn't you tell us that we would go to the Kaaba?' He said, 'Yes. But did I tell you that we would visit the Kaaba this year?' Umar should have walked away at that point.